exactly what they should get. Either we live in a democracy or we don't. We live in a democracy or we don't. Supporters here in Scotland who disagree with independence to acknowledge that in a democracy it's the people who should decide. It's not for our democracy to be blocked by Boris Johnson or anybody else. We elected a majority of this place to have a say, and in a democracy the people should get what they vote for.
But no politician can stand in the way of democracy. Democracy is not a single fixed moment in time. But no politician can stand in the way of democracy. Democracy is not a single fixed moment in time. People in a democracy have the right to change their minds. 2014, back then Scotland was told we would lose European Union membership if we voted for independence, and now we're out of the European Union because we didn't become independent. But I think the position of the UK government and David Cameron in particular does really underline the fact that the risk, the threat to Scotland's continuing membership of the European Union doesn't come from the prospect of Scottish independence. It comes from a growing Euroscepticism within the UK government and that possibility of an in-out referendum. I believe that would be the wrong road for Scotland to go down, but that would be the risk for Scotland if it opted to stay within the United Kingdom. Back then, Scotland was told we would lose European Union membership if we voted for independence, and now we're out of the European Union because we didn't become independent. That's happened against our will. The second question is whether a Brexit vote will mean a second independence referendum. Well, here's what the SNP manifesto at the recent election said about that. The Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the European Union against our will. Now, I'm clear that if Scotland does indeed face that prospect of being taken out of Europe against our will, then that option is on the table. But to be clear, that situation only arises if Scotland votes Remain next week. If Scotland votes to leave, then that premise for independence doesn't arise. If Scotland votes to leave, then that premise for independence doesn't arise. And now we're out of the European Union because we didn't become independent. That's happened against our will. If you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe. We didn't become independent. That's happened against our will.
Question number 4, Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, as the end of Pride Month approaches, whether she will provide an update on the implementation of Scotland's world-leading LGBT inclusive education.
First Minister.
The recommendations of the LGBTI Inclusive Education Working Group were published in November 2019 and accepted in full by the Scottish Government. Good progress has been made by the LGBT Inclusive Education Implementation Group in delivering on the recommendations. The Implementation Group have, in partnership with COSLA, promoted effective delivery of LGBT inclusive education in all Scottish schools and engaged with young people to seek their views and experiences. The LGBTeducation.scot website is also a very important resource. It contains a toolkit of inclusive education resources and a basic awareness e-learning course for education staff on LGBT inclusive education. The Implementation Group plan to deliver the remaining recommendations by the end of the next academic year.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
I thank the First Minister for her answer and would like to put on record my thanks to the Thai campaign for all of their work in making Scotland the first country in the world to embed LGBT inclusive education across the school curriculum. Can the First Minister outline how the Scottish Government will ensure consistency of delivery in all schools across Scotland?
First Minister.
Firstly, can I also take the opportunity to pay tribute to the Thai campaign? I'm proud to be wearing their badge today, and I see many members wearing their lanyards. They have done a great job and made Scotland the first country in the world to have LGBT inclusive education. In terms of the point about consistency, of course we want all pupils to benefit from this, so to support consistent delivery, resources and services have been developed. These are freely provided to schools on the LGBTeducation.scot website. It is of course for local authorities and individual schools to decide what resources they use to deliver the curriculum. A national framework of communication, however, is under development, and that will set out national expectations in this area as part of the ongoing effort to ensure consistency of uptake and principles for effective teaching and learning.
Presiding Officer, to ask the First Minister what recent discussions the Scottish Government has had with the UK Government regarding the provision of accommodation for asylum seekers based in Scotland.
First Minister.
The Social Justice Secretary spoke to the UK Government Immigration Minister in April when he set out a change in policy to assume full asylum dispersal across the UK. In May, the Home Office then began an informal consultation on implementation to which we will be responding. The Scottish Government supports widened asylum dispersal in principle, of course we do, but participation must be voluntary for local authorities and the Home Office must work in partnership with them as well as support third sector support organisations who do provide vital support to those seeking asylum. While the funding announced for local authorities is a positive step, it must be sustainable over the long term and be at a level that provides support for asylum seekers and for local communities.
Maggie Chapman.
I thank the First Minister for that response. She will be aware that there are now 450 refugees and asylum seekers housed in hotels in Aberdeen. She will also be aware of the dreadful acceleration in loss of life in the UK asylum accommodation system, where hotels are becoming institutional accommodation for vulnerable people. Given that mental health and the investigation of deaths are devolved matters, will the First Minister support the design and implementation of a Scottish monitoring and lessons learned system for all deaths in Scotland of people in asylum accommodation or immigration detention here? And will she additionally commit her government to participate fully in Phase 2 of Baroness Helena Kennedy QC's inquiry into the Glasgow asylum seeker deaths and signal her expectation that other Scottish public agencies will do likewise?
First Minister. Well, can I thank Maggie Chapman for that question? I think, as is demonstrated in the actions we take, this government will always seek to use our devolved powers to the full to support asylum seekers wherever and whenever we can. Asylum and immigration, though, are reserved matters, and we have raised a variety of issues direct with the UK Government on our very real concerns and growing concerns over accommodation and treatment of asylum seekers, and that includes accommodation and appropriate support as well as adequate funding to public services. We've also repeatedly requested detail of any investigation undertaken by the Home Office following deaths in asylum accommodation in Glasgow, and we've requested an update on the status of recommendations in an internal Home Office report on asylum accommodation during the pandemic that appeared in the media in April but has not yet been made public. Finally, we've not yet received any approach to participate in the inquiry led by Baroness Kennedy, but of course we will respond positively and appropriately should we do so.
Scotland must continue to reflect and understand her role in colonial legacies which continue to impact the lives of many communities. Racism impacts our historical identities and society in general. Our multiple intersecting identities around race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities, neurodivergence, religion and class need to be much better understood in Scotland. We are heading in the right direction, if you ask my opinion, and Scotland is ready for an inclusive and a more diverse future.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I and many others with an interest in abortion rights have seen comments, some close to home, from people who are seeking to limit our right to access this healthcare. In light of the Supreme Court in America overturning the Roe v. Wade case, what can the Scottish Government do to support women and the LGBTQI community in Scotland who may be concerned about the ramifications of the ruling on their ability to access services safely in Scotland?
Minister.
So let me say I reiterate my solidarity with all women, including LGBTQI women. I would have to say that what has happened in the US has sent a shockwave around the world, and all of us as women with concerns about women's rights are feeling frightened about the ramifications of that decision. But I absolutely can understand why many minority groups are feeling more threatened today than they felt this time last